betrayal usually comes from enemies, but the kind that hurts the most comes from someone you trust with your life. For Michael Jackson, that betrayal didn't come from the media, the industry, or strangers chasing fame. It came from someone inside his circle, someone he believed was loyal, someone he never imagined would turn against him. At first, the signs were small. A strange silence, a promise not kept, a decision made behind his back. Michael felt something was wrong long before the truth surfaced. He became quieter, more guarded, questioning people he had trusted for years. And when the truth finally came out, it shattered more than a professional relationship. It broke his heart. Who betrayed Michael Jackson? Why did this person do it? And how did this betrayal change the way Michael trusted people for the rest of his life? Stay with this story, because what happened next explains a side of Michael Jackson the world rarely talks about. A man deeply loyal, painfully vulnerable, and devastated by a betrayal he never saw coming. Michael Jackson had always believed that loyalty was sacred. To him, trust was not something given lightly, but once it was given, it was absolute. He built his inner circle carefully, surrounding himself with people he believed understood not only his fame, but his fragility, his fears, and the weight he carried every day of his life. By the early 2000s, Michael was no longer the carefree superstar the public imagined. He was cautious, wounded. He had been hurt too many times by the media, by business partners, by people who saw him as a product instead of a human being. And yet, despite everything, he still believed in loyalty. He still believed that some bonds were unbreakable. There was one person, in particular, he trusted more than most. This person had been there during quiet moments, not just public ones. They had heard Michael speak about his children late at night, about his fears of being misunderstood, about how lonely fame truly was. They had reassured him when his confidence wavered, promising support, discretion, and loyalty. Michael never imagined this person would be the one to betray him. At first, nothing felt wrong. Michael was focused on rebuilding his life. He was thinking about his legacy, about being a better father, about finding peace after decades of chaos. He was trying to step back from people who only wanted something from him. Trust mattered more than ever. That was why he leaned so heavily on this individual. They had access, real access, to schedules, to conversations, to private thoughts Michael never shared publicly. They knew where he was emotionally vulnerable. They knew when he was exhausted. They knew when he was afraid. And they knew exactly how to use that knowledge. The first sign of betrayal came quietly. Michael noticed a conversation he had shared in confidence somehow made its way into the wrong ears. A detail that should have stayed private was suddenly being discussed by people who shouldn't have known. At first, he brushed it off. Fame meant leaks happened. Rumors traveled fast. But something about this felt different. He asked gently, not accusing, just curious, "Did you mention this to anyone?" The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. "No, of course not." Michael nodded, but the feeling didn't leave. Then came the second sign. A decision was made about his career without his approval. Something was agreed upon in his name, something that directly affected his finances and his future. When Michael questioned it, he was told it was for his own good. That phrase, "for your own good," made his stomach tighten. He had heard it before. Still, he didn't confront anyone. Michael hated confrontation. He preferred harmony. He wanted to believe there was an explanation, that he was simply tired, overly sensitive. But the signs kept piling up. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered a room. Meetings he wasn't informed about. Documents signed without his full understanding. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was methodical. What hurt most wasn't the actions themselves. It was a realization that someone he trusted was slowly removing his control, piece by piece, while smiling at him and calling him family. Michael began to withdraw. He became quieter, more observant. He stopped sharing certain thoughts. He watched body language, listened more than he spoke. He felt like a child again, aware that something dangerous was happening but unsure how to stop it. One night, alone in his room, Michael finally allowed himself to ask the question he had been avoiding. What if the person I trust most is the one hurting me? The thought made his chest ache. Michael had always been loyal to a fault. When he believed in someone, he defended them fiercely, even when others warned him. Over the years, many people had tried to tell him to be careful, to protect himself better. But Michael believed loyalty deserved loyalty in return. He was wrong. The truth came out not through confrontation, but through discovery, a document, a recording, a confirmation he never wanted. The person he trusted had been making deals behind his back, using Michael's name, his vulnerability, his dependence. They had shared private information. They had positioned themselves to benefit, no matter the cost to him. Michael sat in silence when he learned the full truth. There was no screaming, no rage, just a deep, devastating stillness. He didn't cry right away. Instead, he stared at nothing, his mind replaying every moment of trust, every private conversation, every reassurance he believed. How could you? He thought. I trusted you with my life. The betrayal cut deeper than business. It felt personal, intimate, cruel. It confirmed one of Michael's greatest fears. That people didn't love him. They loved access to him. Later that night, he locked himself in his room and finally broke down, not because of money, not because of contracts, but because once again, someone he believed was safe had proven he wasn't. This betrayal would change Michael forever. From that moment on, trust would never come easily again. He would question motives. He would keep his circle smaller. He would protect his children even more fiercely, terrified that the same kind of betrayal could reach them. But in that moment, alone, heartbroken, and exhausted, Michael wasn't thinking about the future. He was grieving the loss of something far more painful than a deal gone wrong. He was grieving the loss of trust. And he had no idea that this betrayal was only the beginning of a chain of events that would alter the final years of his life in ways no one could have predicted. After the truth surfaced, Michael Jackson tried to do what he'd always done best, remain calm, composed, and dignified. On the outside, nothing seemed different. He still smiled in public. He still spoke gently. He still thanked people politely. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. Trust, once broken, doesn't shatter loudly. It fractures quietly. Michael replayed every interaction with the person who betrayed him, searching for the exact moment when loyalty turned into manipulation. He wondered if the betrayal had always been there, hidden beneath kindness and reassurance, or if something had changed along the way: greed, fear, ambition. The worst part was realizing how carefully it had all been done. This wasn't a sudden act. It was a slow, deliberate process. The person had positioned themselves as indispensable. They had become the gatekeeper, the one who filtered information, controlled access, and spoke on Michael's behalf. At first, it felt like protection. Michael had been overwhelmed, exhausted, and emotionally drained. Letting someone else handle things seemed like relief. Now he understood it was control. Michael began to notice how often decisions had been framed as urgent, leaving him little time to think. Contracts had been presented late at night. Conversations had been emotionally charged, pushing him to agree quickly. Whenever he hesitated, he was reminded of deadlines, consequences, or threats, subtle but effective, and always there was reassurance. Trust me, I'm doing this for you. You don't need to worry. Michael had believed those words. In private, he started asking questions, quietly, carefully. He spoke to people outside his immediate circle, people who had nothing to gain. Slowly, the picture became clearer. Information had been withheld. Choices had been made without his consent. Money had moved in ways he hadn't approved. Every confirmation felt like another small wound. One evening, after putting his children to bed, Michael sat alone in the living room, lights dimmed, staring at paperwork spread across the table. His hands trembled slightly as he traced signatures that were supposed to represent his will, but didn't. They made me disappear from my own life, he whispered to himself. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It made Michael question his own judgment. He wondered how someone so careful, so intuitive, could have missed the warning signs. The answer terrified him. He hadn't missed them. He had ignored them because he wanted to believe in loyalty. Michael had always believed that love, kindness, and trust could disarm cruelty. But betrayal doesn't announce itself as evil. it disguises itself as help. The confrontation, when it finally came, wasn't dramatic. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse angrily. He simply asked direct questions, calmly, one by one. He watched closely as answers shifted, explanations became tangled, and justifications replaced honesty. That was when he knew for certain. The person denied wrongdoing at first. Then they minimized it. Then they reframed it as necessary. Finally, they blamed Michael himself, his vulnerability, his exhaustion, his inability to manage everything alone. That was the moment the emotional damage became irreversible. Michael stood up slowly and said something so quiet it almost sounded gentle. "You were supposed to protect me." There was no response that could fix what had already been broken. After that day, Michael changed the way he moved through the world. He stopped sharing freely. He reduced access. He double-checked everything. But the emotional cost lingered. At night, when the house was silent, Michael found himself thinking not about fame or money, but about how deeply betrayal wounded his sense of safety. As a child, safety had been taken from him through fear. As an adult, it had been taken through deception. Different methods. Same result. He began to understand why betrayal hurt more than open hostility. Enemies announce themselves. Betrayers sit beside you, smile, and wait. Michael didn't seek revenge. That wasn't his nature. What he felt instead was grief. Grief for the illusion of loyalty. Grief for the time lost. Grief for the version of himself who still believed everyone around him meant well. He leaned more heavily into his role as a father. With his children, there were no games, no manipulation. Love was honest, immediate, unconditional. Being with them reminded him of who he really was when trust still felt possible. But even there, fear followed him. If someone could do this to me, he thought, what could they do to my children? That fear would shape many of his decisions afterward, sometimes protectively, sometimes painfully. The betrayal also affected how Michael saw the world. He became more aware of power dynamics, more skeptical of intentions. Fame, he realized, didn't attract loyalty. It attracted opportunity. And not everyone who stayed close did so out of care. Still, despite everything, Michael didn't become cold. He became cautious, but he didn't stop believing in goodness. That was his quiet strength. Even after being betrayed by someone he trusted deeply, Michael chose not to let bitterness define him. He believed that allowing betrayal to harden his heart would mean the betrayer had taken something else from him, his compassion. But healing wasn't immediate. Some nights, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations in his mind. Other nights, he dreamed of being surrounded by people who smiled while slowly pulling him under. The betrayal had left scars. And yet unknown to Michael at the time, this painful awakening would soon force him to make choices. Choices that would reshape his inner circle, alter his final years, and reveal who truly stood by him when loyalty was no longer assumed but tested. Michael Jackson learned something painful in the weeks that followed the betrayal. When trust collapses, silence becomes louder than words. People around him sensed the shift immediately. Meetings felt colder. Conversations ended sooner. Smiles were still there, but they no longer reached his eyes. Michael was present, but guarded, as if an invisible wall now stood between him and everyone else. The betrayal forced him to do something he had avoided his entire life. He had to decide who truly belonged in his inner circle. For years, Michael had believed loyalty revealed itself naturally over time. He thought consistency meant trust, and proximity meant care. Now he understood how dangerous that assumption was. Some people stayed close not out of love, but out of advantage. And advantage disappears the moment boundaries appear. Michael began asking for transparency. Real transparency. He requested full explanations, written confirmations, second opinions. For some, this was no problem. They welcomed clarity. They encouraged accountability. They understood why he needed reassurance. For others, it was uncomfortable. Those people grew impatient, defensive, offended. "You don't trust me anymore?" one asked, with wounded pride. Michael looked at them quietly before answering. "I trust actions," he said, "not words." That single sentence changed everything. One by one, People revealed who they really were, not through confessions, but through reactions. Some stayed calm. Others pushed back. A few tried to guilt him, framing his caution as paranoia or ingratitude. Michael listened carefully. He always listened. And slowly, painfully, he began to see the pattern. True loyalty didn't demand blind faith. It respected boundaries. It welcomed scrutiny. The ones who felt threatened by his clarity were often the ones with something to hide. This realization was both empowering and heartbreaking. Empowering, because Michael was reclaiming control over his own life. Heartbreaking, because it confirmed that some of the relationships he had cherished were never what he believed them to be. One night, sitting alone at his piano, Michael rested his hands on the keys without playing. He wasn't thinking about music. He was thinking about childhood, about how early he had learned to perform trust instead of experience it. As a child, obedience had been mistaken for safety. As an adult, kindness had been mistaken for loyalty. He whispered to himself, "I keep confusing silence with love." The betrayal had forced him to confront a deeper truth. He had been conditioned to accept control as care, and that conditioning made him vulnerable to people who knew how to exploit it. But awareness brought strength. Michael started setting limits, not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. He shortened conversations. He postponed decisions. He insisted on time to think. And when someone pressured him, he stepped back instead of giving in. This was new for him, and it felt uncomfortable. For the first time, Michael wasn't trying to please everyone. He wasn't trying to maintain harmony at the cost of his own peace. He was choosing himself. And that choice scared some people. A few confronted him directly. "You've changed," they said. Michael nodded. "I had to." They accused him of becoming distant, difficult, ungrateful. They reminded him of everything they had done for him. They implied that without them, he would fail. Michael listened quietly, then responded with a calm that surprised even himself. "If loyalty only exists when I'm dependent," he said, "then it was never loyalty." That was the moment the emotional balance shifted. The betrayer, though never named aloud, lost influence quickly, not through confrontation, but through irrelevance. Michael stopped asking for input, stopped seeking approval, stopped sharing vulnerabilities. Power drained away when access disappeared. Still, the emotional aftermath lingered. There were moments when Michael doubted himself, moments when loneliness crept in, whispering that isolation was worse than betrayal, moments when he wondered if he had gone too far, if maybe he should forgive and forget just to avoid being alone. But then he remembered how it felt to discover the truth, and he chose clarity over comfort. Michael found refuge in simplicity, time with his children, quiet evenings, writing thoughts he never intended to share with anyone. These moments grounded him, reminding him that trust could exist, but it had to be earned, not assumed. One afternoon, watching his children laugh in the yard, Michael felt something soften inside him. They trusted him completely, not because he was powerful or famous, but because he was consistent, gentle, present. That's what real trust looks like, he thought. Not control, not fear, just safety. He promised himself something then. He would never confuse loyalty with silence again. He would never confuse proximity with care. And he would never ignore his intuition just to keep the peace. The betrayal had taken something from him, but it had also given him clarity. Michael was no longer the man who trusted blindly, but he was also not the man who closed his heart. He was becoming something else entirely. Someone who understood that trust is not proven by how long someone stays, but by how they behave when they no longer have power over you. And soon, very soon, that understanding would be tested in ways Michael never expected, by someone who would step forward when everyone else stepped back. The hardest part of betrayal wasn't the moment the truth surfaced. It was everything that came after. Michael Jackson discovered that once trust is broken, the world doesn't return to normal. It rearranges itself. Familiar spaces felt unfamiliar. Conversations carried hidden meanings. Even laughter sounded different, as if it could vanish at any second. The silence that followed the betrayal wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. People assumed Michael would explode, confront, demand explanations. That's what most people did when they were hurt. But Michael had never reacted that way. His pain turned inward, where it echoed quietly and endlessly. He withdrew, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. Those closest to him noticed the change. He canceled meetings, shortened phone calls, stopped sharing thoughts he once spoke freely. He still showed up when necessary, still smiled, still performed professionalism, but the access was gone, and that absence unsettled people more than anger ever could. One former confidant tried to fill the silence with excuses. "You know how complicated things get," they said. "Everyone makes mistakes." Michael listened, his expression calm, unreadable. "This wasn't a mistake," he replied. "It was a choice." The words landed quietly, but decisively. For years, Michael had excused behavior that hurt him because he believed confrontation would only bring more pain. He had learned early in life that speaking up often led to punishment, not resolution. Silence had become his shield. But now, silence felt like surrender. Late at night, when the house was quiet and his children were asleep, Michael replayed the events over and over, not obsessively, but carefully, like someone studying a wound to understand how it happened. He realized something unsettling. The betrayal hadn't happened suddenly. It had been building for years. Small compromises, moments when his instincts whispered caution, and he ignored them. Times when he felt uneasy but convinced himself he was overreacting. Michael had always believed in seeing the best in people. He thought generosity created loyalty. He believed kindness would be returned in kind. But betrayal taught him a painful truth. Some people don't betray because they are cruel. They betray because they believe you will forgive them no matter what. And Michael had always forgiven. That realization shook him deeply. "I taught them how to treat me," he thought one night, staring at his reflection in the mirror, "by accepting less than I deserved." It wasn't self-blame. It was clarity. Michael didn't hate the person who betrayed him. Hatred required energy he no longer had. What he felt instead was grief, not just for the relationship, but for the version of himself who had trusted so freely. The innocence was gone, but something else was emerging in its place. Boundaries. The next time someone pushed him to make a decision quickly, he said no. The next time someone dismissed his concerns, he ended the conversation. The next time someone tried to guilt him into compliance, he walked away. Each boundary felt uncomfortable, almost wrong, but also necessary. People reacted differently. Some respected the change immediately. Others resisted. A few left entirely. And with every departure, Michael felt both loss and relief. One afternoon, a longtime associate confronted him directly. "You're shutting people out," they accused. "You're going to end up alone." Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. "I was alone when I was surrounded by people who didn't respect me," he said quietly. "This is different." That conversation marked a turning point. For the first time in his life, Michael understood that loneliness wasn't about the number of people around you. It was about being unseen by those closest to you. He would rather be alone than unseen. As weeks passed, Michael noticed something unexpected. His body felt lighter. The constant tension in his shoulders eased. His sleep improved slightly. His thoughts became clearer. Without the pressure to maintain unhealthy relationships, he had space to breathe. Still, the emotional cost lingered. Trust didn't return easily. It arrived slowly, cautiously. Michael tested people, not manipulatively, but honestly. He watched how they reacted when he said no, when he asked questions, when he didn't immediately accommodate their needs. Those who stayed patient earned his respect. Those who didn't reveal themselves. One evening, sitting with his children, Michael felt a moment of peace he hadn't experienced in months. They were laughing, playing, completely unburdened by adult complexities. He watched them carefully. They trust because they feel safe, he realized, not because they're told to. That became his new standard. Michael promised himself he would create relationships based on safety, not obligation. Transparency, not fear. Mutual respect, not dependence. The betrayal had taken years of trust, but it had also freed him from patterns that no longer served him. And yet, one question remained unanswered. Why had the betrayal hurt so deeply? The answer came quietly one night. As Michael wrote in his notebook, it wasn't just about loyalty. It was about vulnerability. He had trusted that person with parts of himself few people ever saw. His fears, his doubts, his longing to be understood not as an icon, but as a human being. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. And that realization finally allowed Michael to grieve properly, not with anger, but with acceptance. Some people are meant to walk with you for a season, not a lifetime. Understanding that didn't make the pain disappear, but it gave it meaning. Michael closed his notebook, turned off the light, and whispered something he had never allowed himself to say before. I didn't deserve that. And for the first time, he truly believed it. Betrayal doesn't end when the truth is revealed. That's only the beginning. For Michael Jackson, the real turning point came weeks later, quietly, without cameras, without witnesses, without drama. It happened in a moment so small that no one around him realized its importance. But for Michael, it marked the end of one chapter of his life and the beginning of another. He was sitting alone in a rehearsal studio late at night. The mirrors reflected his thin frame, the familiar silhouette the world knew so well. The room smelled faintly of sweat, dust, and memories. This was where he felt safest, where movement replaced words, where music said what he couldn't. But that night, he didn't rehearse. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn to his chest, staring at nothing. For years, Michael had believed that loyalty meant endurance, that loving people meant staying, even when it hurt, that being kind meant absorbing pain, quietly so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. That belief had shaped his entire life. It was also what made the betrayal possible. The person who betrayed him hadn't forced their way into his trust. Michael had opened the door himself again and again because he believed people deserved endless chances. But now, something inside him was shifting. He realized that loyalty without boundaries wasn't loyalty at all. It was self-abandonment. The thought startled him. Michael had spent decades trying not to abandon others, his family, his collaborators, his fans. Yet no one had ever taught him that abandoning himself carried a cost. And that cost had finally become unbearable. He stood up slowly and walked toward the mirror. For a long moment, he studied his reflection, not the superstar, not the icon, but the man underneath. I kept giving, he said softly to himself. Even when it was killing me. The words felt dangerous, honest, necessary. In that moment, Michael made a quiet decision that would change everything going forward. He would no longer explain his pain to people who benefited from ignoring it. The next morning, the shift became visible. When a former associate called, Michael didn't answer, not out of spite, but because he didn't want to, and that was reason enough. When another person tried to reopen old conversations with excuses and half apologies, Michael listened briefly, then said something he had never said before. I don't want to continue this discussion. No justification. No defense. No apology. Just truth. The reaction was immediate. Some people were shocked. Others offended. A few accused him of being cold, distant, ungrateful. Michael didn't argue. He understood something now. People who benefited from his silence would always resent his voice. And he was finally okay with that. This change didn't come without fear. Michael worried about becoming isolated, about being misunderstood, about pushing away people who might still care. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered the feeling of sitting on that rehearsal studio floor, empty, hurt, exhausted. He never wanted to feel that way again. Slowly, new patterns emerged. He surrounded himself with fewer people, but stronger ones. Conversations became simpler. Trust developed slowly instead of instantly. He paid attention to how people treated him when he wasn't giving them something. Those who stayed without expectations earned his respect. Those who disappeared confirmed his decision. One afternoon, someone close to him asked gently, "Aren't you afraid people will say you've changed?" Michael smiled faintly. "I hope they do," he replied, "because the old version of me was hurting." That sentence carried more weight than he realized. The betrayal had forced him to confront a truth he had avoided his entire life. Being loved by everyone meant being known by no one. Michael no longer wanted universal acceptance. He wanted peace, and peace required limits. As weeks passed, he noticed subtle changes in himself. He laughed more freely with his children. He felt less anxious before phone calls. He trusted his instincts instead of dismissing them. The world around him didn't suddenly become kinder, but became clearer, and clarity was a gift. One night, while writing music, Michael paused mid-lyric. The words on the page surprised him. They weren't about heartbreak or betrayal. They were about release, about letting go of people who couldn't meet him where he was, about choosing self-respect over approval. He didn't know if the song would ever be heard by anyone else, but that didn't matter. For once, the music was just for him. Still, the betrayal hadn't fully lost its sting. Some nights, memories returned unexpectedly. A phrase said, a promise broken, a look that now felt dishonest in retrospect. But the pain no longer controlled him. It informed him. Michael understood now that betrayal didn't define him. It revealed him. It showed him how deeply he could feel, how fully he could trust, how profoundly he valued connection. Those weren't weaknesses. They were strengths when protected, and that was the final lesson. Michael Jackson didn't become harder after betrayal. He became wiser. He didn't stop loving people. He learned to love himself enough to walk away. And in doing so, he reclaimed something he had nearly lost, his own sense of worth. As he closed his notebook that night, Michael whispered one final truth to himself, a truth born from pain, growth, and hard-earned clarity. Not everyone deserves access to me. And with that realization, he finally felt free. Betrayal leaves scars, but it also leaves space. In the weeks that followed Michael Jackson's quiet transformation, something unexpected began to happen. Life didn't get easier, but it became calmer. The noise softened. The chaos thinned, and in the silence that remained, Michael finally began to hear himself. He noticed it first in the mornings. He woke up without the familiar tightness in his chest. The anxiety that had once greeted him before his feet touched the floor was still there, but quieter, less demanding. It no longer controlled the rhythm of his day. Michael would sit at the edge of the bed, hands resting on his knees, breathing slowly. For years, mornings had meant preparing for pressure. Calls, expectations, demands disguised as concern. Now there was space, and space felt unfamiliar, but also healing. One morning, Prince wandered into the room, still half asleep. "Daddy," he said softly, rubbing his eyes. Michael smiled and opened his arms. Prince climbed onto his lap, resting his head against Michael's chest. They stayed like that for a long moment, not speaking. That was when Michael understood something profound. The betrayal had taken many things from him, but it hadn't taken what truly mattered. His children were still there. His capacity to love was still intact. His gentleness hadn't been destroyed. It had been tested, and it survived. Michael began spending more intentional time with his children. Not extravagant outings, not grand gestures, but simple presence. Reading together, watching movies, listening. He wanted them to grow up knowing something he never had. That love didn't have to be earned through performance. One evening, Paris asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Daddy, why don't we see some people anymore?" Michael paused. He had always been careful with his words around his children, but he had also promised himself he wouldn't lie to protect adult feelings. "Because sometimes," he said gently, "people hurt us, and loving yourself means not letting that keep happening." Paris thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "That makes sense," she said simply. Michael felt a weight lift from his chest. The lesson landed. As days turned into weeks, Michael also began to reflect on his past, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He revisited moments he had once blamed himself for, situations where he thought he'd been too sensitive, too trusting, too emotional. Now, he saw them differently. He had been human, and humans are meant to trust, until given reason not to. The betrayal no longer felt like proof of his weakness. It felt like evidence of his depth. Still, there were moments when grief returned unexpectedly. A song on the radio, a place he used to visit with the person who betrayed him, a memory that replayed itself without warning. On those days, Michael didn't suppress the pain. He let it pass through him. He had learned that healing wasn't about erasing hurt. It was about not letting it define you. One night, unable to sleep, Michael went outside and sat beneath the stars. He wrapped a light jacket around himself and looked up, remembering nights from his childhood when he would stare at the same sky, dreaming of escape. Back then, he believed success would save him. Now he knew better. Safety didn't come from fame, money, or applause. It came from boundaries, from truth, from choosing peace over familiarity. Michael whispered a quiet prayer, not asking for revenge, not for explanations, but for strength to continue choosing himself. In the months that followed, those close to him noticed a change. He spoke less, but with more intention. He listened more, but tolerated less nonsense. He smiled when it was genuine, and no longer forced it. Some people interpreted this as distance. Others recognized it as growth. Michael didn't correct either assumption. He had learned that not everyone deserved access to his inner world, and that was okay. One afternoon, alone in the studio, Michael pressed play on a new melody he had been working on. The music was softer than his usual work, slower, reflective. It wasn't meant to top charts. It was meant to tell the truth. As he hummed along, tears filled his eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't trying to prove anything, not to the world, not to the person who betrayed him, not even to himself. He was simply being, and that was enough. Michael understood now that betrayal, as devastating as it was, had forced him to confront a reality he had avoided for decades. You can't heal while clinging to people who benefit from your pain. Letting go wasn't abandonment. It was survival. As the chapter of betrayal closed, something unexpected took its place. Not bitterness, not isolation, but quiet strength. Michael Jackson hadn't been broken by betrayal. He had been reshaped. And in that reshaping, he found something he had been searching for his entire life. Inner peace. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. And real was all he had ever wanted.